Okay, well, I think we can begin. And this is, as I mentioned, webinar 9 of the Breadfruit People series, focusing on breadfruit varieties and seasonality. We have an extraordinary lineup of panelists today. And as usual, we will start by setting our intention with an opening pule, an opening blessing. And I invite Megan to do that for us, please.
Okay, mahalo Craig. Pule kako, mahalo Creator, mahalo ancestors in the land. Thank you for this gathering worldwide of people who have this passion and creativity and research-driven love for breadfruit and community and family. Mahalo for the ways that all of the sustenance that we find valuable and nourishing, the ways that it grows and the techniques and the understandings that go from our traditional knowledge into the research that is possible. We ask that you guide this presentation, the speakers that have come and the attendees, that they have open hearts and open minds to the ways that all of this education and sharing is going to flourish in the ways that we guide and plant and continue to nourish our communities through our works. Mahalo for all these things. We love you always. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. Amama ua noa, lele ake pule. Okay, mahalo.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief introduction to the webinar format. We've changed as of last webinar our format a little bit. This one is a panel format, so that instead of formal PowerPoint presentations, we will have a little bit less informal, more interactive question and answer format. So we have pre-prepared questions for the panelists, and we have and then we have your questions. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for being here. We have panelists stretching from Vanuatu to Hawaii to Trinidad. Oral hasn't quite made it yet in Trinidad, and also in France with Jean-Pierre. And also thank you to our participants so much for joining us. We know your time is extremely valuable, and we want to make this webinar as valuable as possible for you. So because of our format and being that we are live, we invite you to take advantage of that by entering your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A box. And that is where you can ask questions of specific panelists, or you can ask general questions for multiple panelists. And once we are done with our pre-prepared questions, we will go into your questions, and we can be more and more interactive with that. So I invite you, as your questions come to mind, to put them in the Q&A box, and our panelists can also answer you via text as others are speaking. And we have Oral just joined us. Welcome, Oral, so much.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm sorry, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the welcome, Greg.
Today also, I should mention Noelle Dickinson from the Bradford Institute was unable to make it. Something came up last notice. And so we are sad not to have her, but just remind you, the Bradford Institute has a nice display of some of their varieties on their website, and that is a valuable resource. And hopefully we can get Noelle sometime in the future, or someone from the Bradford Institute. So we have 90 minutes today. We will go till 1/2 the hour. And so if we are running a little bit long, please feel free. If you have to have appointments, you can go, and we won't feel bad about that. And we also remind you that a recording of this webinar will be posted to the Breadfruit People YouTube channel, which you can link from the Breadfruit People site, breadfruitpeople.com. And this webinar series is funded and made possible by the Farmers Organizations for Africa, Caribbean, and the Pacific program, which is a joint partnership between the EU, ACP, IFAD, and PIFON. And I am very thankful to be here today, and I know our time together is short and special, so I'd like to begin with our panelists right now. And before we do that, I will give a short introduction of each. I think you've seen perhaps on some of the Breadfruit People media, the bios, and we have them posted to our Zoom page, but I'll just read a short bio for each of them. We have Dr. Oral Daley. He is a researcher and educator with the Department of Food Production, Faculty of Food and Agriculture at the University of West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. He has professional experience in the areas of agricultural production, food and quality management, and education. His PhD thesis focused on ethnobotanical, morphological, physiochemical, and genetic diversity studies in breadfruit. We are also pleased to have Dr. Jean-Pierre Labus, who is with CIRAD, the French Agricultural Research and International Cooperation Organization, working for the sustainable development of tropical and Mediterranean regions. With a background in agronomy, Jean-Pierre is a senior researcher with extensive experience in plant breeding, genetic resources management, and ethnobotany. He launched the project for the Breadfruit Project for Vanuatu in 2004 as part of a program funded by the Pacific Agricultural Plant Genetic Resources Network, and helped establish the first national breadfruit collection in Vanuatu. So thank you very much for being here and being up late for us, Jean-Pierre. We also have John Cadman. John Cadman is a chef and founder of Maui Breadfruit Company, which began in 2013. His company is dedicated to restoring breadfruit as a major food crop. And Maui Breadfruit Company and its products have won numerous awards, and in a very short period of time has become well known throughout Hawaii, at least, and parts of the world. John is a strong advocate for strengthening local food systems through innovative product development. And we're very fortunate to have such a busy entrepreneur with us. And thank you, John, for being with us. We also have our fourth presenter today, who is a late addition, and I have to thank her for the short notice and for joining us this morning from Vanuatu. Floriane Lawac is the head of the Root and Tuber Crop Section at Vanuatu Agricultural Research and Technical Center. Floriane has a master's degree in plant breeding at Montpellier Sup Agro in France. And last but not least, she is a mom of an 8-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. So thank you for joining us. I would like to begin with a general question, and we'll go around to each panelist. And we'll do that in the order that, that I introduced you. And so we'd like to hear your experience, and please share freely with us. And so the first question is, why is it important to categorize, survey, collect, and conserve breadfruit cultivars? And what are the biggest challenges to doing so? So if you would, Oral, we would welcome your thoughts on this, and you have a few minutes.
Okay, Fred. All right. So why is it important for us to classify and conserve breadfruit. Now, I like to take this from the perspective of, making breadfruit a commercially viable crop, something that we can see people consuming a lot more of. And when we think about some of the challenges that we face for breadfruit commercialization right now, we recognize that a lot of them are production related. And a lot of those production related problems can be minimized or addressed through proper cultivar selection. This entire webinar is about seasonality, and I know we are going to get in a lot more detail about seasonality a little later on. But something like seasonality is one of those issues that we can address by having proper cultivar selection. We also look at things like disease susceptibility. In our experience here in the Caribbean, we know that there are some cultivars that are more tolerant to certain diseases than others, or put it in the other way, some are more susceptible to diseases than others. And so from that perspective, it's very, very important for us to be able to select cultivar and to classify cultivars. We also must not forget things like consumer preferences and so on, and even the nutritional properties. Several studies have shown that there are clear differences when it comes down to different cultivars, the different nutritional properties that they have. And so having an expanded range of cultivars really can help us to increase utilization, because then we can somehow appeal to a wider consumer then, in terms of if we have consumers with different preferences, and also in the development of different products. Studies that we have done here in the Caribbean show that different breadfruit cultivars are more suited to use for different products. And so it's very, very important in that respect. Now, the part about conservation, let us remember, a lot of breadfruit varieties are actually seedless. So, we can't really talk about even breeding to develop new varieties for some of those. It's very, very, very difficult. But we also recognize that there's an existing genetic diversity of breadfruit. We have some here in the Caribbean, but in the Pacific where it originated, you have even a wider base. And so if we lose some of these varieties, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to recover them. And when we think about something that we're considering for commercialization, years from now, decades from now, we made, some of these, what we would call the lesser cultivars, we will possibly find uses for them. And so it's necessary for us to conserve them. Not only that, the genetic diversity that you have in those, what I'm terming lesser cultivars right now, they can provide a basis for selection. And of course, for those varieties that are diploid and we can do some kind of breeding in those, of course, they can also contribute to that. So conservation is extremely important, and we have to do whatever we can to really prevent the loss of any cultivars. Craig, I think that's what I want to share with the audience this afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that perspective. Wonderful. Now we can go to Jean-Pierre. Would you like to share your thoughts on this question? I can read it one more time for our participants. Why is it important to categorize, survey, collect, and conserve breadfruit cultivars? And what are the biggest challenges to doing so? I believe you're muted. You're muted, Jean-Pierre.
Yes. Laurent, I think, gave a very nice speech about the importance to conserve. Perhaps I could develop on the diversity of the breadfruit, especially in the Western Pacific. So, as you know, the breadfruit was domesticated in the Western Pacific, in Papua New Guinea, in Bismarck Archipelago, and It is in the area of Western Pacific, Vanuatu included, and Solomon Island included, that we have the highest genetic diversity. And as you know, in this area, most of the cultivars bear seeds. And just I want to take the example of Vanuatu. We have made some survey in the years 2000, and nearly 100% of the cultivars where we recorded were seeded, except in a few places where some Polynesian groups settled several hundred years ago and more recently. And also, what is important to know that in the Western Pacific, the farmers use both ways of propagation of breadfruit, from seed, which creates diversity, because new variety appear at each generation, and also from root cutting, when the farmers want to conserve a specific cultivar with interesting traits. So we have a mixed system of propagation by seed and cuttings that makes diversification of breadfruit cultivars particularly dynamic and rapid compared to other tree crops. And the result is that there is a huge number of cultivars. We survey some island in Vanuatu, and we record 223 different cultivars in only 2 villages. And myself, I compile some data from different papers, and I reach a number of more than 500 names of cultivars. And this was far to cover all the island. So we conserve some of this cultivar, and perhaps Floriane will give us an update of the situation of the collection. And the point I want to raise is that when we look at this situation, we can see a kind of paradox. In Western Pacific countries, we have a big reservoir of diversity for breadfruit, but breadfruit tend to get less attention than in the Eastern Polynesia and Micronesia, and even outside Pacific in terms of research, extension, and valorization. So this diversity is largely underutilized, for example, for breeding, and it is certainly insufficiently documented. And we have a limited number of cultivars from this region conserved in national and regional collection. And one of the reasons, I think Floriane say that probably it is due to the fact that the breadfruit has a lower importance within the diet and also culturally compared to other staple crops like root crops and even banana, which are the chief crops in this region. So I just finished my speech to say it's by a question. How can we improve that situation? And what actions the breadfruit community could propose to better valorize this diversity, which is largely untapped in the Western Pacific. So I will leave the question open for discussion.
Thank you. That's fascinating, and I'm so curious about the potential here. Let's move to John Cadman with a little bit different perspective as a user of breadfruit and just a wealth of knowledge about actually pioneering very exciting and wonderful dishes and products from breadfruit that might elevate its status in places, certain places where it's undervalued. So John, please, would you like me to read the, actually, you know what? Because John is a bit different perspective, may I ask you a bit of a different question?
Sure, sure.
So what have you learned about breadfruit cultivars in your development of innovative products for the marketplace?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I have been in the fortunate situation where I've been able to partner with the Bradford Institute here on Maui. And for those of you that don't know, we are very honored and privileged to be able to have the largest collection of cultivars in one place. I'm pretty sure in the whole world. I believe they have over 150 cultivars at Kahanu Gardens out in Hana. And I've been able to access their fruit for the past 8 years. And so I've learned a lot about the different cultivars and whatnot. And in regards to that first question too, I mean, there's not much I can add to, because pretty much all the points were brought up, the importance of biodiversity, just having, learning the growth characteristics depending on where you can actually grow the fruit, because, we all know that it's 20 degrees north, 20 degrees south is sort of the region that breadfruit grows, but, sub-Sahara Africa is a lot different growing conditions than, let's say, tropical, Western Pacific type growing conditions. So I think that's going to have a lot of effect on production characteristics. But as far as diversity in fruit, I mean, it's just I guess what really amazes me about breadfruit is how much diversity there actually is in the different varieties. From not just, there's texture differences. Like, for example, Lipette is a variety they have at Kahana Gardens. Lipette is one of the most amazing varieties there is. The fruit gets huge. In fact, I've actually weighed a few Lipettes that are 13 pounds was the biggest one that we ever harvested. And if you were to see a 13-pound breadfruit, it looks almost just like a jackfruit. And it's a seedless variety. But what's so interesting about it is the texture of the fruit, it's really stringy. And so it actually lends itself to almost like how they use jackfruit at mature stage for things like, fajitas or, like almost like a Kahlua pork type of a texture. And you can add, and of course, it's a savory dish. But it's, again, not very dense. So for the things, and thank you, Craig, for, the buildup for my products. For those of you that don't know, I have two products, basically. Well, my two main products. One is Pono Pies, which is, of course, a sweet pie that I use breadfruit as the base, but then I also make Ulu hummus. So, so for the hummus, we want to use fruit that is at the mature stage. So, getting back to the varieties, the texture goes from that real kind of stringy, not too dense, to more of like the Tahitian variety. And in Hawaii, the variety that the Hawaiians brought was from Tahiti. And it is a real dense, seedless variety that is actually really good at mature and also, ripe stages. And it's interesting because, okay, and I should mention too, just for the sake of nomenclature, when we refer to mature fruit, what we're talking about is fruit that is harvested that has the starch is fully developed. Because and also for people that may not know, breadfruit will not mature anymore once you harvest it off the tree. So if it's just like an avocado, if you pick it too soon, it's just not going to mature and ripen the correct way. So you want to make sure that you get your fruit at the mature stage. So once that is accomplished, and we could have a whole nother webinar about harvesting, when and how to tell when fruit is ripe, because every variety is different. They're all different clues you get as to how and when the fruit is ripe to be picked. But the main thing that you harvest it when it's mature, so that once it's harvested, if it is its mature, fully developed starch stage, it will at that point continue to ripen. And that is where you go from that firm, dense, potato-like stage to that very sweet, aromatic, completely changes. It's almost like a different food. So, what's so interesting is you can harvest, let's say, 100 pounds of fruit off one tree. But if you steam the fruit you wait maybe a day or 2 days and 3 days, you'll end up with a completely different product. So like I say, for my pies, I like to, harvest it at mature stage and then let it just slightly ripen. And just as it gets to be that slightly sweet, soft stage, it gives it a really nice aroma. But it's interesting because the differences in even one particular variety can be huge if you just wait a few days before you steam the fruit and as it continues to ripen. And then there's also the aspect of density. Like we have a really large commercial production and now out in Hana, not just the Kahanu Gardens, but also Hana Ranch actually has a couple hundred trees. And they've mainly planted Ulufiti, which is a really interesting variety. It's very large, but if you were to hold a Ulufiti and a Hawaiian Ulu or a Tahitian variety of the same size, you would notice that the Hawaiian variety is much more dense. So it has a huge difference in texture. As far as for production, kind of getting back to the first question is, why is it important to have and try and get as many different cultivars going? Because depending on the variety will determine a lot of the uses that you'll be able to utilize the fruit for. For example, if you have seeds in your fruit, as much as I like the texture and aroma and the flavor of Fiti, because it does have seeds, you're kind of limited as far as what you can utilize the fruit for. You can't really slice it to make chips with seeds in the middle of it. So, that is definite consideration. Yeah, and if anybody is ever on Maui, I'd love to take you out to the gardens because in Hawaii, like I say, they brought one particular variety here, our Ulu, but they also at the gardens out there, they have a few different varieties that are really similar to the Hawaiian variety, but they're larger. And from a commercial standpoint, those would be really ideal to, I think, to focus on and try and get going in a more, I guess, commercial way so that we could propagate those. I think the amount of production you get out of those would be significantly greater. So yeah, I guess that's any other things, Craig, you wanted me to touch on?
Well, maybe you could talk about, I was thinking, you were getting on the topic of certain varieties are good for certain types of products, and I'm sure people have questions about maybe the varieties that you favor for different products, or maybe the categories of different varieties. I don't know if it's specific to varieties or categories.
Yeah. Well, I will say in general, I definitely like the larger varieties, the fruit with larger varieties, or larger fruit, anything that maybe 3-4 pounds and up. I think in that aspect, just because when you process breadfruit, you generally quarter it, steam it, and then have to peel it. Now, it's really hard. I don't think anyone's really developed a large scale, completely mechanical process yet to process breadfruit, at least that I know of. And so just from the processing standpoint, it's much more efficient to have a variety that's much larger. So like, for example, the Ma'afala, one reason why that got so much attention from the Breadfruit Institute was because, well, several, I think. One is the nutritional aspect. It was seen to have a little bit higher nutritional content in certain things, but also the tree is a little bit more compact. So for people that were planting trees in their backyard, it seemed to have a little more favorable characteristics for that standpoint. But as far as fruit texture, you know, I don't like the Mafala because it's not as dense. And so I kind of prefer the fruit that is a little more dense, and seedless, because it's one less thing to have to deal with. So yeah, I definitely like the Hawaiian varieties, or like I say, the Tahitian varieties. They have one, in fact, in front of the gardens. It's called Hamoa is the variety, and it's like a Hawaiian variety, but it's about twice as big as the size. So I think, you know, looking at varieties that have a little bit larger fruit is something we should really focus on. I remember one time I was cooking ulu curry for an event, and I remember from one breadfruit I was able to make curry for like 40 people. It was amazing. So yeah, I think the little bit larger varieties, seedless is ideal. And then, but also, like I say, when you harvest, to make sure that you get it at the peak maturity, but process it before, you know, depending on what you're going to use it for. So yeah, it really depends. And I'm fortunate because my pies, the breadfruit is the base, but because it's usually at mature or slightly ripe stage, it's fairly neutral in its flavor. And so I do get some, you know, inconsistency, but it's never in a bad way. It's just sometimes it might be a little fruitier than others based on its actual ripeness, you know. But there's so many other products we can deal with breadfruit, you know. We're doing tamales, and then of course just the steamed cubed fruit is something that we really want to try and get going, because, you know, as we know, breadfruit is seasonal, you know, and this is a point I'd like to touch on, because sometimes there's, you know, people talk about, you know, well, having a bunch of different varieties planted in one spot so you can have fruit year round. But that is going to be hard to achieve, I think. I mean, because even with the 150 varieties at Kahanu Gardens, they go for, I'd say, a good 4 or 5 months of the year without any fruit. So I don't think having, you know, trees that bear fruit year round, even with as many varieties you can get, is too realistic. So, you know, one of the keys is processing the fruit, and how I process it is I steam it. Well, I quarter it, steam it, peel it, and then freeze it. So, you know, having fruit that is on the denser side, a little less moisture in it, seems to freeze better, and as far as, you know, being able to utilize in the off season, because that's the only way that I'm able to stay in business year round, by processing the fruit in the peak season and then having it for when it's not available. You know, like now, we're pretty much, our season's over right now. So yeah, having that is super important. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. We'll come back to seasonality. In fact, I have another question for you about seasonality we'll come to next. And I just want to remind our audience to please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. That box is very convenient for panelists to answer directly to you, your questions. So that's the Q&A box rather than the chat box, if you would, please. And so I invite you to put your questions in as we go along. Finally, we have our panelists from Vanuatu, and I will ask you the same question, Floriane, if you would, please. And I know you're working with collections in Vanuatu right now that Jean-Pierre initiated a while back. So why is it important to categorize, survey, collect, and conserve breadfruit cultivars? And what are your challenges? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As Jean-Pierre said, Vanuatu has a huge diversity of breadfruit. But in BRTC, in the station, we have 63 cultivars of breadfruit from the archipelago, from Vanuatu. Breadfruit diversity in Vanuatu is, when we compare the northern part and southern part of the archipelago, the northern part is have more diversity of breadfruit than the southern part. For example, an island called Malo in the north has more than 100 cultivars that are known, whereas in the southern part of Vanuatu, there is an island called Tongwa. In the island, they got only 10. So in the north, we have around 100, and the southern part of the Vanuatu, we have around 10. So there is more diversity in the north than in the south of Vanuatu. The crop is widely used, and it's referred more as a staple food in Vanuatu. As I said earlier, Vanuatu cropping system is root crop based. So farmers tend to add fruit trees around the yard or around the garden apart from root crop. So main staple food are root crops, and then secondary are the breadfruits. So for us, it's important to conserve different cultivars of breadfruit because we are in the Pacific where there is often natural disasters. And if you got only one tree of breadfruit in your backyard, and when the cyclone came, then you have the big chance of lost it, damaged your breadfruit trees. So here in our perspective in BRTC, the challenge, as you know, we have a huge diversity of breadfruit, but the collection that we conserve here is only 63. Last year and in 2020, 2021, we start go around from one island to another, doing some survey, prospection, and also collection. So we collect a few new breadfruit, then we add on our existing collection. So the purpose here is to collect, conserve, characterize. Also, as you know, research on breadfruit in Vanuatu is low, is small. There is not big research study yet. So what we do, our first step is to go around again, collect breadfruit, and bring it back to BRTC on the biggest island of the Vanuatu, Santo. So the challenge that we have is, one is the propagation techniques, and the other one is the season of fruiting. Sometimes we go around to the collection on the wrong time. Sometimes we go when there is no fruits, so we cannot get some fruits to have the seeds. So what we do is we got only root cuttings, and when we get back, sometimes when the technician had some bad handling or transportation on ship or plane, sometimes we lost our cuttings, and it's very hard for us to go and get some other cuttings again from the farmers and from the other islands. So it's expensive. I mean, the cost of transportation, collection is expensive. So these are some challenges that we face. Also, all our cultivars in Vanuatu are seeded types. So sometimes there are too many seeds on the fruit, and farmers tend to dislike this kind of cultivars. They prefer those who have only few seeds, so so you have more flesh to steam and eat. So what we face here is we are in the Pacific region where we have many disasters. So we'd like to know some techniques on how to propagate or crossbreed our cultivar. Also, we'd like to know more about our nutritional composition of our best cultivar that we have here. We would also love to teach our farmer of pruning the trees to bear more fruit lower, or to be more safer during disaster, such as cyclone. So these are the challenges that we have. And when we have those good breed of breadfruit, maybe we hopefully look for more on the value adding and processing to try the mass planting of breadfruit in Vanuatu. For now on, they got few breadfruit on, for example, in 1 yard, you can have only 2 trees of breadfruit. There's not much like other countries in Pacific. So that's how Vanuatu is about breadfruit.
Thank you very much for your perspective.
Thank you.
On that. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Well, I think at this point we will go to our next question. And this one is, will vary a little bit by panelists. So with Oral, you touched on seasonality earlier. And I wonder if you could expand upon your thoughts on what you've learned about seasonality of different cultivars in terms of the regularity of their production and quality issues, and perhaps even more than that, the seasonality based on region and that kind of thing. So please share. Oops, you have to unmute.
Well, Craig, there's quite a bit I could say about seasonality. But before I even comment on that, I think I really should give credit to the work that Professor Roberts and Kuma has done over the years, and her publication. I'm looking at the germplasm collection here at the University of the West Indies, where you looked at different cultivars and the season of bearing. That was a very important descriptor that she used, talk about season of bearing and so on. And when we examine and explore this whole issue of seasonality, and it was very, very interesting to hear John's take on that when he said that even with the wide diversity that you have in Hawaii, in the collection that they have there are still 4 to 5 months that you don't have any breadfruit. And so, and that's a similar experience for us here in the Caribbean. So even though we recognize that you have differences in season among cultivars, and I would venture to say that most of our Caribbean cultivars are, those cultivars that we could say are sort of extant here in, that has been in the Caribbean for quite a while. In terms of seasonality, we observe that the main bearing season is somewhere between June and October, and then we have sort of a smaller season between December and February. And even with the addition of the some recently imported Pacific cultivars, there are still times of the year, as John pointed out, when we really don't have any breadfruit. But I still strongly believe that it's an issue that must be explored a lot more. My good friend in St. Vincent would tell me that, yeah, what, they have breadfruit for pretty much most of the year. Again, they do have seasonality, and I think what he was pointing out that you know, because of certain environmental conditions in very, what would I say now, almost like in pockets of St. Vincent, you would find breadfruit producing throughout the year. And so I think this whole business of seasonality has to be explored in the context of location, right? That is something that we really have to look at. But and it's very, very important because, you know, if we're talking about commercialization, that whole business of availability is extremely important. John tells us about, you know, ways that he ensures that he has breadfruit throughout the year, which is, you know, find methods and ways of storing breadfruit so you have it at your disposal whenever you want it throughout the year, and that is fine. That's very good, very, very commendable. But if we're talking about the fresh fruit, you know, how can we access the fresh fruit? I think more can be done. We may not have it for all 12 months of the year, but we certainly can find ways of expanding that. But we have to look at locational issues. You know, our main variety here in the Caribbean, well, we simply call it yellow or yellow water, you know, as it go from different islands in the region. But I think everybody have a fair idea of what we're talking about, whether it's yellow or yellow art and so on. I'm bringing up this variety because, again, you know, I found John's presentation very, very interesting in when we, for example, the comparison with Marfala. And when this yellow variety that we have here in the Caribbean, one which is favored because of the yellow flesh and all of that, and it's very, very comparable in terms of nutritional content when we compare it to the Marfala. While the Marfala did have slightly more nutrients in some areas and so on, there was really no significant differences. For example, one study that we look at, you know, starch, we talk about the resistant starch content and the non-resistant starch, and we recognize that the yellow is a very, very, you know, very, very important variety. It also produces a much larger fruit than the Marfala. It's a seedless variety, very, very important. But, you know, quite seasonal again. You get it for, you know, that time I told you about, June to September. And then, in fact, in only very specific localities, you may get a second bearing sometime between December and February. And so we really have to find ways to sort of work out this whole business of seasonality, and I believe that it is one of the areas for the future, how we deal with it, because if we tie in all of that with consumer preference, we can't simply just get a cultivar because it bears outside of the period when the yellow is not available, because our consumers, and you know, we have done studies here in the region, shows that our consumer have a clear preference for the yellow. And so it's really about getting something that is comparable to you know, to sort of augment or to support the use of yellow in the region. So that is it when it comes on to seasonality. Now, Craig, with the first question you asked me about conservation and all of that, I just want to add, because I don't think I have covered that in my first response, and that was the whole business of challenges. And, you know, all the work that Professor Nkrumah has done to really conserve a germplasm here, not as large as what we have, as what is present in Hawaii, but certainly one of the most diverse collection outside of the Pacific. It can be very, very challenging. It's, you know, it's costly. Of course, not all of those varieties will be able to get farmers to plant because of, well, the preferences that consumers have and so on. And so those are some of the challenges, in addition to what other members of the panel have reported in terms of, you know, propagation of some varieties. Some varieties prove very, very difficult to propagate, and we have tried several means, and it's challenging in that regard. So those are some of the challenges, but just managing and protecting the germplasm itself can be a challenge, especially when we, the dry season, which we are now coming up on. That is, it's really finding ways to get through that. And those are also areas that I believe that we really have to think about and research breadfruit going forward. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you very much. This is developing into a fascinating discussion.
What's the name of that yellow?
Oh, Auntie Shirley's here, folks, for those of you who have seen her in previous webinars. And she was just asking about the variety that Oral mentioned. So yes, it's called the yellow is the variety,
Just,
yeah.
but no name other than the yellow.
Is there another name besides the yellow for that variety?
Well, unfortunately, that's just the name we use in the Caribbean. Yeah. So it would be, of course, all of our breadfruit came from the Pacific. So chances are, you call it a different name there. But what is going to be needed now is for us to really make that link and compare it side by side. But in the region, throughout the Caribbean, you'll just hear people refer to it as yellow or yellow art. Really just variation of the same name. But we don't have any of we haven't retained any of the Pacific name that you could probably hear and make that comparison to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let us turn to Jean-Pierre, and with a question about cultivar diversity again. And what aspects, since you've been involved in this work for quite a long time, of conserving genetic diversity, not only for breadfruit, but for many crops. Perhaps you could address the aspects of cultivar diversity that you see as having the most potential value for the future.
Oof. This is a very big question. You see, as a breeder, I will say that the character that we have to choose or to select the character which meets the needs of the users, whatever they are. They are farmers or some people who are processing breadfruit. It's difficult to me to answer to, because it's mainly the user who can define the characters, the more interesting characters they need. What do you think?
Yes,
as a breeder, you have to adapt to what the user wants.
I see. So what are your thoughts about on-farm conservation and perhaps the benefits of that to farmers and also the industry as a whole?
Yes, that's another point I propose. Yes, you see, regarding breadfruit conservation, in 2007, Dr. Graham Jackson wrote a nice report on breadfruit conservation strategy. This report, you can find it on internet. But this report focused mainly on collection established on research center and agricultural station. And in that case, you see, the steps are researchers or extension people visit farmers and record data, take cuttings, bring them back to the center and establish a collection field. And once the trees are established in the collection, most of the time, the farmer who gave the cutting are forgotten. They become invisible. And this way is not really satisfactory, you see. And I think that it's getting harder and harder to do it that way. And at least there is 4 reasons. First, farmers have new rights, you see, with this, thanks to these several international treaties. And there are national policies to access to biological material and benefit sharing. And at least moving plants is and will be more complicated than in the past. And the second point is that most of the country has no, and the national institution have not the means and the land to maintain large collections in the long term. And also a collection established in one location is extremely useful for research, but it's also vulnerable. And one of the major risks being the cyclones. And Floriane will talk about the cyclone Harold. It's a category 5 cyclone who came 2 years ago, directly on and passed over the research center, and all the trees of the national collection were totally broken. They don't disappear, but now they are recovering, and it is very difficult. And also, to make a link with my first point, it's really impossible to conserve all the cultivars, mainly, especially all the cultivars that are in the Western Pacific, because they are too diverse. It's the reason why I want to share an idea. It's about to consider on-farm conservation for breadfruit as a complementary way to exit conservation. So it's not a new concept, as you know. Maybe some countries have experience on it. And the added value is that it introduces collaborative relationships with the farmers. The principle is that the planting material remains at the farm level and only data are collected. So I will not expand on the data to be collected, because there is very nice guidelines by the Bradford Institute what to observe, picture to take. And we have also some guidelines in Vanuatu. And it's probably important to collect leaf sample for genetic analysis and also some fruit sample. And also by chance, for the last 10 days, we have new tools like smartphone, iPad, with this integrated GPS and camera. And you can equip these tools with nice software for data collection. For example, there was a software named Kobo Collect, which makes it possible to record all type of data in the field, geodata, pictures, to fill questionnaire. And after that, the software generates maps and tables. So at the end of the process, instead of having a list of cultivars conserved in a research station, you will have a sort of map of an island, a map of a village, and with the name and the contact detail of the farmers and all kind of data related to the tree. So the beauty is that the trees remain in their native environment, the farmers take care of them, and the farmer become visible, you see. And with your mobile phone, now you can stay in touch, interact with them, go back to them, take other sample or cuttings. So this is a point I want to introduce for the discussion. Maybe some of you have such experience on conservation on farm and can share it. That's the point I want to raise here.
Thank you very much. Yes, so if you're familiar with any on-farm conservation programs in the Pacific region, I believe you're thinking of maybe anywhere, please write that in the chat for Jean-Pierre.
Okay, Craig.
Yeah.
If I could just mention one point, that an observation I've made based on the question, the seasonality of the cultivars. You know, Hawaii, I think every island has this characteristic, and that is because of the way the islands are set up. You have these different regions of rainfall, and also based on elevation, you have different temperature ranges. I will say this, even as I mentioned, the Kahanu Gardens that has all those different varieties, they don't have fruit year round there. However, I must say I've observed pretty much year round, there's a tree somewhere on Maui that has fruit on it. So I think moving forward, one of the things that, we should really look at is realize that maybe in one particular region, you may not have your trees fruiting year round, but in another region that has slightly different, environmental conditions, you would be able to do that. Because like I said, at some point, any time of the year here, you can find a tree that has fruit on it. And I'm thinking that's mainly attributed to the differences in our climate here, rainfall, temperature, humidity. And I will mention too, though, there are aberrations occasionally. And in Lahaina at the Historical Society on Front Street, that's the Baldwin house there. There is a breadfruit tree in the parking lot behind the Historical Society that was actually on the map from 1847. So this tree, it may be a root sucker from that original, but this tree is still in existence, and it has asphalt all the way up to the trunk. But because it's across the street from the ocean, I'm sure of it that the roots have actually gone down and are hitting the brackish water. And that tree, every time I've observed it for the last 8 years, it has fruit year round. And so I don't know why. I have a feeling it has something to do with that. It's a really, really old tree, maybe, and it thinks it's on its last leg. I'm not sure, but just an observation I wanted to share.
Oh, thank you very much. I was just about to ask you a question related to what you said. So that was perfect. I also was wondering, because you've had experience looking for fruit in maybe off-season periods, what's your experience of not only different regions and different climate zones, but different agronomic practices such as pruning and or irrigation, how those might affect seasonality in your experience? And I realize this is somewhat just anecdotal, but it'd be interesting
Right.
to hear your thoughts.
Well, yeah, I think breadfruit I think we all know that it's extremely tolerant and resilient. It's one of the few fruit trees that can survive a hurricane and get snapped off at the trunk, but it'll grow back. So it's amazingly resilient in that respect. However, I also know that from the trees I've observed on Maui, the growing conditions have a huge impact on the fruit. Like, for example, I would say the happiest breadfruit tree that I've ever seen was a tree that was planted up in Waikapu Valley. And it was planted right next to the stream bed, so that the roots definitely got down and had full access to water all the time. It was in a environment with very little trade winds because it was really well protected. And this tree, I believe at 4 years, it was probably 25 feet high. You could not even see through it. And it had 5-6 pounds Ulus all over it. And on top of that, it was bearing fruit year round at the time. I have a feeling that it probably transitioned more into seasonality, once it got a little older. But yeah, just the type of, the amount of water a tree's getting, the lack or of harsh winds, and also the type of soil. The soil up there was just ideal. It had never been farmed with pineapple or sugarcane. So it makes a huge difference, because one of the other observations we're seeing here in Hawaii is, as the Ma'afala has had a real tendency for fruit drop. And we're seeing that all across the state. And, so it can't be just a matter of not enough water, because we know a lot of these farmers are giving plenty of their trees plenty of water. So it does make a huge difference on the type of fruit. For example, in Hana, and even in Kahanu Gardens, and also Hana Ranch, the ulufitis we're getting are anywhere between 5 and 8 pounds. I mean, they're big. They're like a bowling ball. But I've gotten ulufiti from backyard farmers that have grown it, and their fruit is considerably smaller. And I think it's just because maybe they weren't getting enough nutrients, enough water, it wasn't planted right. So yeah, there's a huge amount of variability when it comes to the end product of the fruit that I think, you know, you really have to take into account when you're growing these different varieties. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Let us go back to Floriane, and I would like to have your thoughts on conserving diversity in the Vanuatu context. I know you're working mainly with root crops, but what is the importance of diversity conservation for farmers in Vanuatu? And I also invite you to make comments on anything else you would like, including the topics that we've been bringing up with other panelists.
Okay, thank you, Greg. As you know, Vanuatu is an archipelago. Each island has its own microclimates. So from north to south, there is big differences. So farmers, you know, here in Vanuatu, breadfruit is seasonal. Sometimes when we have big weather changes or climate change affecting our islands, some of the trees take bear fruit all year round. But here in Vanuatu, the peak season of fruiting is around October to April, especially in Vanuatu. The peak season of bearing fruit is around October to April. So for us, for breadfruit lovers, when they want to consume more, but the season is off and we don't have any more breadfruit to eat. So what the farmer tend to do is they identify neighboring villages. They identify genotype cultivars that have early maturity, early mature cultivar, and also they identify also late mature cultivars. So what they tend to do is they plant some tree of early mature cultivars and late cultivars in their backyard so that they can extend their consumption of breadfruit. And when it comes to weather changes, sometimes our breadfruit trees bear fruit all year round. The other thing is in Vanuatu, location is important. In some area, we don't find any breadfruit. The other place we found breadfruit. So people continue to do domestication of breadfruit. They propagate it through root cuttings. And sometimes all year round you can see breadfruit, but sometimes the cultivar, the season is different, depending on the variety, depending on the cultivars. So some years in Vanuatu, we can find breadfruit on the market all year round because of the season of each different breadfruit cultivars. So farmers sometimes they select genotype in the forest that can rapidly cook. So they prefer more the kind type of cultivars. So they add also, so the best cultivar that they found, they propagated more. So there is more abundant cultivar with that characteristics. compared to others who are late mature or they have many seeds. So sometimes they try to adjust the consumption according to the season of fruiting of breadfruit. And here in the RTC and the research station, it's one of our objectives also is to collect different cultivars around Vanuatu and try to add in our database which one is early, which one is late, so that after that we can propose to our different farmers, interested farmers, and also try to teach them how to prune different trees so that they can bear fruit lower and bear fruit on the right season.
Thank you very much for that. Wow, this has been quite a rich series of comments and a wide variety of experience you all have. Since Auntie Shirley's here, let's take a short little break. Auntie Shirley. Auntie Shirley's the one who actually, she invites the breadfruit to the webinar. So what did you bring for us today, Auntie Shirley?
Hooulu mochi.
So Auntie Shirley brought some hooulu mochi. So mochi is usually pounded sweet rice, very sticky, very chewy. What's in this one?
Coconut milk, a little brown sugar, and ripe hooulu.
So there's no rice.
No, well, yeah, excuse me, rice flour.
Oh, so
Mochiko.
there's some rice. So there's some mochi rice flour,
Right.
some coconut
Coconut
cream,
milk, yeah,
and a little bit of sugar.
a little brown sugar.
And it's ripe breadfruit, so it's very sweet. I'm going to taste it. Very chewy
Yeah,
and very fruity.
first time doing it too, so I think I did not add enough coconut milk to make it a little more, a lot softer, which the way you usually find mochi in the markets. But
Thank you. You know, the incredible creativity of people like Auntie Shirley and John, and I'm sure many of our participants, is one of the most exciting things about breadfruit, I think. And we also have Richard Bayer, a food production researcher and scientist, and he coaches people on our webinar right now. So anyway, thank you for that little break. Let's get to some more questions if we can. And these are from our participants. I'd like to touch on the topic of uniformity of product and consistency of product. We had a question from Daniel about that in terms of flour. And John, you brought up consistency requirements for your product line based on just having breadfruit available, as well as the flavor changes that might occur when you have different varieties, and weighing the consistency requirements of a product line against the benefits of diversity. So diversity imparts many things, as our panelists have spoken about, such as opportunities for new products, resilience to environmental stressors, and so forth. So I would like you to share your thoughts on this, and we can do this. You can raise your hand, and if you have some thoughts on this, please share. Are you open to sharing on this, John?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think what it really comes down to is what particular product you're making, and will determine the need for consistency in what actual breadfruit variety you're using. I by dumb luck was fortunate to come up with two products that can allow for a fair amount of variability in texture and flavor. Use it, you know, in my pies and hummus. I think, and I really don't have any experience making flour, but I really think that to get a super consistent Hooulu flour, I think the consistency would be pretty important, you know. Or let's say, for example, if you're making chips or like Hooulu French fries, you know, that would be, and I think that's another product that we really should look into. I mean, with as many, you know, French fries that are served in our island resort destinations, I think Hooulu fries would be a huge potential market there. But yeah, so again, it may sound kind of vague, but I think it's more determined by the type of product that you have, that as far as how important consistency in the flesh is. So yeah, again, it depends.
Anyone else like to tackle that one? About uniformity and consistency versus conservation of diversity. Okay, so we have a question about identifying different cultivars using characteristics. How can somebody perhaps present resources on how to identify breadfruit characters? I know several of you have worked in that area. Oral, okay, unmute.
I guess, Craig, I don't know if I'm taking the easy way out, but I want to, especially our Caribbean participants, I want to refer them to this. Oh, you're not seeing it, it's not showing. To the work by Professor Nkrumah, the Breadfruit Germplasm Collection at the University of the West Indies, because in that publication, Professor Nkrumah has basically outlined all the cultivars that we have here in the Caribbean, in addition to the cultivars that were, you know, we recently introduced from the Pacific region, and tree descriptors, leaf descriptors, fruit descriptors, all of those are really spelled out in that publication, in addition to pictures showing you the fruit and the leaf and so on. So I think that's a very important publication to help you identify, but even for people who are involved in the whole business of processing and so on, you know, to see characteristics that are going to be important to them, you know, yield characteristics and utilization characteristics. We talk about things like the thickness of the flesh. You know, John talked about fruit, you know, a fruit that is more dense, he finds to be more appropriate for a lot of the uses that for a lot of the things that he used them for, even nutrition. So this publication really spells that out quite well, and it's something that I really want to recommend for our Caribbean viewers, but even from the Pacific as well, because there are quite a bit of Pacific varieties that are mentioned here, those varieties that we have here in the region. And you know, when we had sort of a prior discussion to today, Craig, we were talking about probably, you know, making a connection in terms of seasonality to, okay, what is the kind of seasons that some of these varieties are producing in the Pacific and then here in the Caribbean. And I think that is going to be, you know, something very worthwhile. If I could just sort of segue into the question you asked earlier, and I know John gave his input on about consistency. Well, I am certainly not into product development or anything like that. But I want to take it from the perspective of production, because a lot of, you know, processors have said that that's one of the reasons why we don't have more commercial operations involved in breadfruit in the Caribbean, because they can't get consistency. They can't get enough, of course, and then, you know, they would never want to mix cultivar, because I mean, you know, that can definitely show off thing. And you know, customer, as we mentioned earlier, customers have preferences, and if you try to mix cultivar, that can be problematic. And so it's really about, for me, it's really about identifying those cultivars that would meet specific requirements. Then if we can then get producers, you know, to produce them in large enough quantities to satisfy the demand there. No, that doesn't mean that all breadfruit producer, in even if we just think about Trinidad, that all producers in Trinidad would have to produce the same variety, right? It's just that what we have to do is to make that connection between, okay, the purpose of production. So if you are producing breadfruit for flour, what is the, you know, which would be the ideal variety for flour? But if another variety is being produced for, let us say, fries or chips, you know, what variety would be more suited for that? And I think, you know, that's where we really have to think about if we want to maintain and achieve that consistency and to really build a sector around that. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you very much for those thoughts. Let's go to kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from consistency, and I'm curious, and we have a question about propagation from seed in the Q&A box. So as Jean-Pierre and Floriane have said, varieties in Vanuatu are often, or maybe not varieties, but breadfruit is propagated by seed. And so I'm wondering about the advantages of doing so, and what is the motivating factor behind that? And I'm curious, very curious about that. So perhaps one of you could respond to that.
Yes, I can respond. You see, I say the breadfruit are propagated by seeds. They are also propagated by cuttings. In fact, you see, people in Vanuatu are very interested to have different variety of different crops. They have a sort of, they like to have a large panel of varieties of taro, a large panel of variety of yam, and it's nearly the same with the breadfruit. I think they like to have different kind of breadfruit, and for that they use seeds. They use seeds, they plant seeds, but also they can sometimes take seedlings in the forest. And if really the cultivar which appear from these seeds, it's interesting, they propagate it by cuttings. So you see, it's a really mixed system of propagation. Perhaps Floriane could say something about that, but I think there is a huge diversity in Vanuatu for every kind of crops. And people like that, really.
That is fascinating. Floriane, do you have any comments, final comments?
Just to add on that, yeah, in Vanuatu, people love to, you know, diverse their garden, have many taro. It's good so that you can have this kind of taro, and sometimes it's a proudness it's a proudness that I've got that variety, and if you don't have this one, we can exchange. So it's the same of all other crops. If you have many cultivars of breadfruit, it's something that is like a cultural proudness that we have here in Vanuatu. If someone would have only one or two kind of breadfruit or oranges, we will say that no, it's not a good farmer. We cannot exchange a lot with him. We prefer the other one who have so many type of fruits or so many different varieties of root crops. That's And sometimes, according to our cultural, traditional nutrition, we will see big difference. Some islands, they eat only root crops, and there's no many nut trees or breadfruit. In the other islands, you will see many fruit trees, but less fruit crops or less vegetables. That's how Vanuatu is, and that's depending also on our microclimates and soil type. But yes, in Vanuatu, we have different type of breadfruit, and that's how we propagate it from seeds. And sometimes when we say to someone else that I've got the best breadfruit in my garden, and when it's not the season, I say, okay, can you give me cuttings, please? That's how we propagated our breadfruit, by seeds and by root cuttings.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. Yes.
I have a record. I have a record of in a small island, an island of 1,000 hectares to 2,500 acres. There is a record of 61 cultivar name, and it's an island you have only 150 households. You see, so just to show you that the diversity, the people like diversity, because they could, of course, just propagate by cutting. They know very well the way to propagate by cutting. But we know there is some island people like prefer seeds instead of cutting. And for example, we made a catalog of, I don't know if you see it, no, perhaps not. We made a catalog of 200 cultivars with pictures and also a different description of breadfruit. And of course, it's extremely difficult to identify a breadfruit variety in Vanuatu just by the characters. It's the reason why we are planning to make some genetic characterization of the collections. And probably we'll start already. We have defined some tools for that, genetic tools, and we'll probably do that this year or next year. And this is the main way especially in the Western Pacific, where you have so many kind of varieties, that's to know exactly what is, to identify each variety.
Thank you. Floriane?
I would like just to add something on about what Jean-Pierre said earlier about on-farm conservation. With our experience about the go around on one island to another, do some collection, we found out that it will be a good strategy to do some on-farm conservation, because when we took out some cuttings from one island and then we take it back to Santo, where the research station is, then we lost directly, or the cuttings cannot grow. So sometimes it's better that we leave them there on the existing island or endemic island, so that we cannot move it around, chances to lose it again. So I think it's a good strategy, a good idea to use this on-farm conservation, because what we can take many cuttings of different kind of cultivars from from north, bring it to the South Island, but many times there is high chance that we lost every cuttings. That's it. I just want to say that it's a good idea. Maybe Vanuatu, maybe I will talk to Julian, maybe it's a good thing. Maybe we can talk around with our agriculture departments, extension, if we can set up some on-farm conservation. identify the island where there is a big diversity of breadfruit, and maybe identify as a on-farm conservation. Because here, when we try to get everything in the north, in the south, in Santo, it's a big challenge.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And a wonderful place to conclude on diversity and on-farm conservation. And before we're running a little late, but before we go, perhaps a word from Irene of Breadfruit People, and she'll keep us informed about what's going on there.
Hello, everybody. My name is Irene. I'm with the Breadfruit People, for those that don't know. Wow, what a session. So informative. So love all the sharing between people. Thank you so much to the panelists. We really, really appreciate you being here and sharing with us. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you so much. It's been very, it's nice to see everybody connecting and also sharing information. I've in the chat group, you'll see I've already put in some of our information. If you'd like to email us, if you'd like to join our conversation, if you'd like to be part of our mailing group, also our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. All our previous webinars are on our YouTube channel, like our Facebook page, so you can follow us and see what's coming up. We do have our last webinar with this series coming up in a couple of weeks. Breadfruit People have some exciting projects coming up. We're really, really happy to be sharing this with you in the next couple of weeks. Also, thanks to Craig and Megan for facilitating these. And I'd like to just maybe ask Kyle if he had anything else he'd like to add. But again, thank you, everybody. Have a look at the chat and connect with us. We'd love to, Breadfruit People is about sharing. We're not, we still have a long way to go, and with your help, we'll get there, about sharing everything and anything to do with breadfruit. So I'll just pass it on to Kyle real quick, if you'd like to say something.
No, just to say thank you. I mean, so many great messages, but the message of diversity in our farming systems came out really strong. And I feel exactly the same way about Breadfruit People. I really think the strength of our network is in the diversity. And you look at our panelists and you see researchers, you see private sector. Over the last couple of webinars, we've had farmers and just moms and aunties and chefs. And I really believe that the strength of our network is in its diversity. So thank you guys for joining in. Thank you for your heart of sharing. And we're just excited for the next steps. And thanks again to Craig and Megan.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Wonderful to be working with Irene and Kyle and your whole team, and feel very supported. I want to thank our participants and our panelists, especially, who have, on the one hand, woken up very early in the morning to join us, Floriane in Vanuatu, and on the other hand, staying up very late at night, Jean-Pierre in Montpellier, France, and also Oral in Trinidad. And thank you very much to John Cadman, who, despite his obvious interest in the commercial product industry, he's shared so freely with us. Thank you to all of you, and it's been a great session and greatly appreciated everything you've shared. So with that, we'll conclude.
Thank you for having me. Okay.